In 1962, Centralia, Pennsylvania set a landfill fire to clear trash before Memorial Day. The flames slipped through a crack, found an abandoned coal seam, and never stopped burning. 63 years later, today, the pavement buckles like cooling lava. Steam hisses from the roads. Residents noticed their basements were warm enough to dry laundry without machines. They thought they'd discovered a miracle. Then someone pushed a thermometer into the ground. It maxed out and snapped at 900 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt the soles of your shoes. The town council insisted the fire was contained. Then the basements kept heating. Then the air monitors started beeping. This isn't the kind of disaster that explodes. It's the kind that waits. A fire you don't see until the earth decides to show you. Nobody in Centralia expected the fire to last more than a few weeks. It was just a routine Memorial Day cleanup. Burn the trash, douse the flames, move on. But beneath that landfill was something far more dangerous. A sprawling labyrinth of abandoned anthracite coal tunnels. The purest, hardest, slowest burning coal on Earth. Once anthracite catches fire, it can burn for centuries. The danger didn't announce itself. It whispered. On May 27th, firefighters doused the flames. 2 days later, the fire was back, slipping deeper into the coal seams, out of reach. Smoke rising from the ground wasn't unusual in a coal town. Centralia had lived with warm soil, sulfur smells, and old vent holes for decades. So when thin white steam drifted off the landfill, people shrugged it off. But the smoke changed. It thickened into oily, blue-gray plumes that carried the sharp sting of sulfur. You could taste metal at the back of your throat. Miners said the heat underground felt wrong, too steady, like something breathing beneath their feet. By August, 203 miners were out of work. The fire had already shut down 27 small mines. Union President Clarence Cashner contacted the Department of Mines. This is spreading out of control. We need immediate action. The state arrived and threw everything they had at the problem. Digging trenches, flushing the tunnels with thousands of gallons of water, sealing seams with clay. But this wasn't a surface enemy. Every time they sealed one exit, the fire slipped into another forgotten passage. By spring 1963, the money ran out. The fire didn't. The ground beneath Centralia had become a slow-motion bomb, and it was drifting toward the homes. If you were one of the first people to sense something was wrong, what's the first thing you'd investigate? The smoke, the heat, or the smell? By the late 1960s, the fire had stopped behaving like a mining accident. It had started behaving like an intruder. The first sign showed up inside the homes. The Anderson family noticed their basement felt alive. Warm air seeped through the floorboards, even in winter. Their dog refused to go downstairs, barking at the doorway as if something were waiting in the dark. When they finally checked the air, the meter flashed 50 parts per million of carbon monoxide, levels that cause headaches, dizziness, and long-term poisoning. They weren't the only ones. Families all over Centralia whispered about strange symptoms. Persistent nausea, burning eyes, a sour sulfur smell drifting through vents. This wasn't a disaster with flames. It was one with symptoms. But in a coal region, odd smells and warm patches weren't unusual. Normalcy became its own kind of defense. Mining towns are always like this, people said. Then the symptoms accelerated. By the mid-1970s, residents reported their living rooms warming without heaters. Wallpaper peeled from humidity. A few began keeping journals, tracking temperatures and symptoms, while neighbors dismissed them as paranoid. Then came 1979. At Coddington's Esso station near St. Ignatius Church, the owner lowered a thermometer into the underground fuel tank and jerked it back out. 172 degrees Fahrenheit. Gasoline begins to vaporize at 140 degrees Fahrenheit. He wasn't running a gas station anymore. He was sitting on a pressurized bomb. That incident forced the state to enter more than 400 homes, installing air quality monitors. Many came back positive for dangerous CO levels. Some families quietly packed and left. Others dug in, furious that outsiders were exaggerating. Centralia wasn't just splitting open underground. It was splitting socially between those who felt the town was turning toxic and those who refused to believe it. Which would scare you more, invisible poisoning in your own home, or watching your neighbors deny it's happening? 18 months later, the earth made the decision for them. Because in February 1981, the ground opened beneath a 12-year-old boy. It was Valentine's Day, 1981, a cold, gray Pennsylvania afternoon, the kind where the ground feels brittle and hollow under your boots. 12-year-old Todd Domboski was cutting across his grandmother's backyard, following the same path he'd walked hundreds of times. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous, just another shortcut. Then the earth opened. Without warning, the soil beneath him collapsed into a perfect circle, 4 feet across. like a trapdoor dropping out of the world. Todd plunged downward, swallowed by a churning pit of steam and darkness. The earth had literally swallowed a child. Centralia's invisible enemy finally had a face. But this wasn't just a hole. It was the mouth of a 150-foot vertical shaft, with a faint red glow at the bottom. The burning, oxygen-starved heart of Centralia's underground fire. Todd didn't fall all the way. He grabbed at anything. His hands caught a tree root jutting from the shaft wall. He clung to it, suspended over lethal heat, screaming for help as scalding steam blasted past him. His cousin, Eric Wolfgang, heard the screams. He sprinted toward the sound and saw a column of white steam erupting from the ground. Todd's voice came from inside it, but Eric couldn't see him. Without hesitation, he dropped to his knees, reached into the blinding vapor, and grabbed blindly until his hand locked around Todd's wrist. He pulled with everything he had. Seconds later, Todd was out, shaking, burned, and gasping for air, but alive. When firefighters and engineers arrived, they measured the gas inside the sinkhole. Over 500 parts per million of carbon monoxide, a dose that kills an adult in minutes. Later readings showed temperatures of 135 degrees Fahrenheit in the shaft, hot enough to blister skin in seconds. The incident was the breaking point. State officials, already touring Centralia that day, witnessed the aftermath firsthand. Within 48 hours, they expanded gas monitoring to every remaining home and began drafting evacuation plans. Reporters flooded the town. Engineers mapped the collapse zone and discovered the chilling truth. For 19 years, the fire had been hollowing out enormous, unsupported voids directly beneath Centralia. The town split instantly. Some demanded evacuation. Others accused the government of fear tactics. But the sinkhole changed everything. Centralia could no longer pretend this was just smoke or inconvenience. The earth had delivered its verdict. Denial was dead. You get 1 hour to grab one item before your entire neighborhood is evacuated forever. What do you take? 3 years after Todd Domboski was nearly swallowed by the earth, the federal government reached a conclusion Centralia had been dreading. The town could not be saved. In 1983, engineers released the study that ended the debate. The underground fire covered 195 acres, and extinguishing it would cost an unthinkable $660 million, requiring the excavation of the entire town anyway. On August 11, 1983, Centralia residents voted, not on whether the fire was real, but on whether their home was worth fighting for. The overwhelming majority chose relocation. In 1984, Congress approved $42 million to buy out every remaining home. On paper, it was mercy, a lifeline. But nothing in Centralia was simple anymore. For some, the buyout felt like escape, a final chance to get out before the ground opened again, before carbon monoxide crept through the floorboards at night. These families signed immediately, packed quickly, left quietly. Others looked at the offer and saw something far more sinister. Some residents believed the buyout was a pretext, that the government wanted their land for the valuable anthracite coal beneath it. Coal the borough technically owned. Lawsuits would later claim the fire was a smokescreen for a massive land grab. Courts ultimately disagreed, but the distrust never healed. Neighbors who once shared holiday dinners now argued on porches. Someone who urged caution might hear, "We were here before the fire, and we'll be here after. This isn't a safety issue. This is our land." This wasn't the collapse of town. It was the collapse of trust. Between 1985 and 1991, the government acquired 545 properties. Houses disappeared one by one. Streets emptied. Centralia didn't die in an instant. It faded, lot by lot, family by family. But dozens refused to leave. They would fight every notice, every hearing, every threat. And then the government escalated. Eminent domain, condemnation orders, and the removal of Centralia's zip code. The legal war for the town's future had begun, and it would last decades. If this were your home, would you leave or stand your ground? By the early 1990s, Centralia was no longer a town. It was a skeleton. Porches with no houses. Streets with no cars. Sidewalks leading nowhere. Nature moved in quickly. Trees swallowed abandoned porches. Deer wandered through what used to be living rooms. And in winter, steam drifted across the broken asphalt of Route 61 like the place itself was exhaling. But even as the world wrote Centralia off as a ghost town, some people stayed. By the year 2000, only 21 residents remained. A decade later, just 10. Not stubbornly, not blindly, but because they believed a home wasn't defined by the ground beneath it, even if that ground was burning. Their legal fight became the town's final lifeline. They challenged every condemnation order, every hearing, every attempt to uproot them. Reporters came and went. So did waves of curious tourists, searching for the smoking ground, who the remaining locals watched like spectators of a slow-motion disaster. Then came the harshest blow. In 1992, Pennsylvania invoked eminent domain, claiming every property in the borough. Residents sued. The case went all the way to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in 1995, and they lost. From that moment on, they lived on land they no longer legally owned. In 2002, the town's zip code was revoked. Centralia no longer existed on paper, only in memory and on steaming ground. Finally, in October 2013, after 3 decades of legal battles, the state reached a settlement. The remaining 7 residents could stay until they died. After that, every deed, every lot, every structure would revert to the state. Today, only 5 people remain. Grass has reclaimed the old neighborhoods. The legendary 2-mile graffiti highway, once a warped, colorful canvas for explorers, was buried in 2020. Yet the ground still breathes. In 2018, new vents opened near the old cemetery, proof the fire is still migrating, still alive beneath empty land. Centralia didn't vanish in an explosion. It faded like a memory, one denied, one fought over, and one finally surrendered. If you visited Centralia today, what would you explore first? The steaming vents, the silent streets, or where the graffiti highway used to be? Most disasters announce themselves with noise, with sirens, explosions, breaking glass, flashing lights. Centralia never did. It was a slow-motion catastrophe, the kind that creeps instead of strikes. The kind you don't notice until the ground has already changed beneath your feet. And that's the part most people miss. Yes, this is a story about a coal seam fire. Yes, it's about denial and warnings ignored, and a town that slowly disappeared. But at its core, Centralia is about something far more universal. The disasters we live with because they don't look like disasters yet. For 19 years, residents stepped over warm patches of earth and told themselves it was nothing. For 19 years, officials said it was under control. For 19 years, the fire kept moving, quietly, predictably, patiently. Not out of malice, not out of mystery, just out of momentum. And the earth doesn't follow our assumptions. It follows physics and heat and time. The fire beneath Centralia burns 300 feet underground across an 8-mile stretch. It advances roughly 75 feet every year. Digging it out would mean moving more than 400 million cubic yards of earth, more than the Panama Canal. Flooding it would poison groundwater across 1,000 square miles. Sealing it would require closing off 400 miles of abandoned coal tunnels, many unmapped, some structurally collapsed decades ago. So the fire burns. And Centralia is not alone. In Juriyah, India, coal fires have burned since 1916, swallowing neighborhoods and forcing mass relocations. In Burning Mountain, Australia, a seam fire has smoldered for nearly 6,000 years, detectable only through thermal imaging and rising plumes of heat. These fires don't care about human schedules. They run on geological time. Centralia's fire may burn for another 250 years, long after the last house collapses, long after the final resident is gone, long after anyone remembers the landfill spark that started it. Some dangers explode, others wait, and the ones that wait are the ones we're least prepared to face. If you could ask one of Centralia's last 5 residents a single question, what would you ask them?